Yesterday, I presented an analysis of various types of money in two time periods, the Second Industrial Revolution and post-1970. I showed that while the purchasing power of the dollar depreciated relative to goods and services, gold, and to a certain extent silver, appreciated in purchasing power. All one had to do was buy it, hold on to it, and wait. That was because gold and silver were good money, and as a consequence, those who held it reaped some of the benefits of productivity improvements in these two time periods. Well, I found more comprehensive data going all the way back to 1876 for oil, cotton, wheat, gold, and silver. They are displayed on this chart. I will take my analysis now a step further and discuss long-term trends in the purchasing power of gold, silver, and the dollar by using this data. This will help us to eliminate the possibility that gold appreciated only during the two time periods selected and did not gradually appreciate over the entire century and a half. First though, if you haven't seen my video from yesterday, please go watch it. It is titled Good Money Appreciates, and it was released on September the 26th. I'd also like to let everyone know that I caught an error in my first graph. Those cotton prices were supposed to be in cents per pound, not dollars per pound. It doesn't change any of the trends or the percentages presented in the video, or any of the conclusions. I just wanted to point it out to avoid confusion. With that said, let's rearrange this data in a number of ways and see what kind of messages it has for us. All graphs in this presentation will be on a logarithmic scale. Here I represent how much of various items a fixed quantity of gold can buy starting in 1876. I've normalized all of the data so that each data series starts at 100. Thus, a value of 100 at any point in time represents 100% of gold's initial purchasing power. You can see that gold's purchasing power has fluctuated quite a bit as measured in wheat, cotton, silver, and oil. The implication of this oscillation is that there are periods of time when gold can be considered expensive, and periods of time when gold can be considered cheap. I've emphasized this fact many times in my previous videos and presented some tools that could be used to purchase gold at times when it's relatively cheap. The gold to oil ratio is my favorite tool. Notice how the purchasing power of gold, despite the large oscillations, has trended up as measured against all of these items. In 2014, gold could purchase 167% of the oil that it could in 1876. In other words, it could purchase 67% more oil a century and a half later. This is an annual increase in purchasing power of 0.4% per year. In terms of silver, gold could purchase at the end of this period 591% of what it could in 1876, or 491% more of it. Thus, gold appreciated relative to silver at an annualized rate of 1.3% per year. Again, note that there were periods of time when the amount of silver gold could purchase dropped, but the century and a half long trend points to silver becoming gradually less valuable than gold. This doesn't mean that silver will not at some point regain its initial monetary ratio relative to gold, but based upon a trend that has been in place for more than a century, I think the odds grow slimmer with every passing year. Gold can buy much more cotton than it could in 1876, having appreciated against it by 1.4% per year annually, and in terms of wheat, gold has appreciated the most. Annually, the amount of wheat gold could purchase climbed by about 1.8% per year. So gold is a good money. Its purchasing power of the most important commodities has gradually increased over time. All one needed to do was purchase it and let it sit quietly. The rates of increase are less than what they were during the Second Industrial Revolution and from 1970 to the present time, but positive nonetheless. So my selection of the data sets for the previous video overstated the gradual rate of increase in gold's purchasing power. Taking a more holistic view, it appears that the rate of increase in gold's purchasing power is probably 1 to 2% per year. Of course, on a real basis, this is a fairly healthy rate of return for an asset that just sits there and has no counterparty risk whatsoever. So now let's turn our attention to silver. Silver has had a respectable showing with regards to purchasing wheat and cotton, but it did not hold up so well relative to gold and oil. Silver could buy nearly twice the wheat that it could buy a century and a half ago, and this is an annual rate of appreciation of 0.5% per year in purchasing power. In terms of cotton, it can buy 23% more today than it could in 1876. This is a more modest 0.1% per year rate of appreciation. So in terms of agricultural commodities, silver has increased in purchasing power somewhere between 0 and 0.5% per year. And this is respectable. It has at least maintained purchasing power in terms of agricultural commodities, if not appreciated a little bit. The picture looks a little bit more bleak when silver's purchasing power is measured in oil and gold. Silver buys only 28% of the oil that it was able to purchase in 1876. This is a 0.9% decrease per year in purchasing power. And in terms of gold, silver can only buy 17% of the gold that it could buy in 1876. This is a 1.3% annual decline in purchasing power relative to gold. As was the case for gold, there are big swings in purchasing power over time, and this suggests that there are times when silver will be a good thing to buy and own, and times when one should be avoiding buying and holding silver. No big surprises there. Nevertheless, there is a long, steady downward trend in the value of silver relative to oil and gold. I think what this means is that the world over the past century and a half has drifted away from treating silver as money and as a store of value, and is treating it more like an industrial commodity. Maybe this trend will continue, maybe it won't. It's anyone's guess. But I've taken a look at consumption statistics, and it does look like the percentage of new mine supply that goes towards investment is on the rise relative to industrial consumption. And so there is some hope there. Regardless, there have been some decade or 2 decade periods of time when silver was a better holding than was gold. I think the key to identifying these periods ahead of time is to look at the relative value of silver and make your investment decisions from there. Okay, time to bash the dollar. If you're watching this video, you probably already know that the dollar is not a good long-term holding. Soft money advocates like it that way because it makes debts easier to pay. Notice the rate of depreciation in the dollar over a century and a half. But unlike silver and gold, whose definitions don't change, the definition of the dollar changed in 1933, and again very significantly in 1971. Rather than look at the rate of depreciation in the dollar over the entire time period taken as a whole, let's look at pre-1970 and post-1970. Notice that prior to 1971, despite FDR's devaluation of the dollar in 1933, the dollar's purchasing power was quite stable for almost a century. The dollar's purchasing power did decline, but not by more than 1% per year. What's interesting to note about this is that the dollar over this entire time period was defined in terms of gold. In 1873, the Coinage Act specifically defined the dollar as 25.8 grains of fine gold. In other words, the dollar was about 1/20th of an ounce of gold. In 1933, Roosevelt redefined the dollar so that a dollar was worth much less gold than before, and this highlights one of the major pitfalls the saver in dollars faced. Yes, the saver thought he or she was saving something that was as good as gold, but the definition changed when the debts became difficult to pay. Thus, instead of holding a gradually appreciating money, like gold, the fact that the government had control over the definition of the dollar meant that the saver had a gradually depreciating money. This is a lesson that should be taken from history. Even if a currency is someday backed by gold, one should remember that the currency will never be as good as holding the gold itself. It makes you wonder about non-government backed paper claims on gold, doesn't it? Fast forward to 1971. Nixon closed the gold window and severed the tie between the dollar and gold. And this was a very big victory for soft money advocates. Of course, it didn't need to be a defeat for hard money advocates. All the hard money advocates needed to do was buy gold. But look what happened to those who chose to hold dollars. For the past 45 years, the dollar's purchasing power in terms of wheat has dropped by 3.6% per year. In terms of cotton, it has dropped by 2.7% per year. In terms of silver, it has dropped by 4.9% per year. In terms of oil, it has dropped by 8.5% per year. and in terms of gold it has dropped by 7.7% per year. This is an absolutely horrible showing. One might say that nobody holds dollars for the long run as a savings vehicle. People put the currency to work by lending it out at interest. In a way, this statement is correct, but in another way, it's not. There are many dollars in existence, and at any point in time, someone is holding them. During that period of time, they are losing purchasing power. The only way to avoid losing this purchasing power is to pass the hot potato along to someone else, and then it's that person's turn to hold them. So our society on average shares the burden of this vaporization of wealth, all for the privilege of using this thing called the dollar. Yes, you can lend it out at interest, which is now zero by the way, but the rates paid hardly compensate for the loss experienced. In addition, the government gets to tax the so-called profit. And if you loan it out, you also face the possibility of the potential for total loss. But remember what I said. If you are a hard money advocate, you have a choice of money. 1971 was not a defeat for you. Just pick the right money, hold on to it, and wait.